Hello and welcome to this tutorial on creating incredible figures for your LaTeX documents with Inkscape. Now by incredible figures, I mean for the scope of this video, figures that have the same font family and font size as the remainder of your document, and especially scalable vector graphics, which are graphics that can scale infinitely rather than raster graphics, which describe the pixels or regions of pixels and therefore can look blurry when you zoom in. So in this sense, I'm wanting to create a figure for this sample document I have that is going to reflect the layout and design of the rest of the document and not just look like I copied a PNG file over from Microsoft Excel without regard for the font size or the scaling of the figure or any of those other layout considerations. So I have a very bare bones document here. I'm just creating a simple article class document here with 10-point fonts and US letter paper. And I'm just adding in a few packages here to change the font family and adjust the spacing a little bit, particularly around punctuation. But beyond that, it is literally just begin document and end document with 5 paragraphs of filler text sandwiched in between. So there are no figures at present, but let's go ahead and change that. So my first step when I want to figure out how I'm going to lay out a figure in LaTeX is to actually just render the document sans the figure. So the current version of the document, which is currently just text for me. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually just load that into Inkscape. So I'm going to press Control I. This would be Command I if you were on Mac OS. And I'm going to choose this sample PDF file that I have here. Now there are a few tabs here in this import dialog. I find that Cairo import tends to work better because it respects the font families better rather than trying to load in text elements. So Cairo import, in my personal experience, is going to reflect what you would actually see when loading the document in, say, a PDF viewer, whereas you might not get exactly that with the Inkscape import. Okay, so the utility of loading this document into Inkscape is that I can now get a sense of the scale of the text. So I want actually to figure out what this line width is. And so I'm just creating a rectangle, and I'm creating a rectangle that is approximately the same width as this text here. And actually I'm going to arrange it relative to last selected. And what I really want here is to get a size that is close to the full line width, but not exactly the line width, so we don't run into any overfull HBox or overflow warnings or errors. So I now have a pretty good idea of what the scale of this figure is. And this rectangle is actually pretty useful because I can create a new document. So I just press Control N here, paste in this rectangle, and then resize my document. So either by going through the document properties and clicking on resize the content, or by using the shortcut, which on Linux and Windows is Control-Shift-R, and it would be Command-Shift-R on Mac OS. And now I know that this rectangle is exactly the size that I want my final figure to be. So there's no guesswork involved here, and I'm not having to play around with the width or the height of any images that I'm importing, which would then, of course, change the font size or the scaling. So I can now create any figure that I like here. So what I tended to do when I was doing scientific publications is I would spend some time, it's a labor of love, to take in some figures from, say, Matplotlib or MATLAB, and actually manually tweak them, not to fabricate results, but to make the layout more compelling and make it more consistent with the rest of the document. In this case, what I'm really going to do here is just create some random shapes and add them to the figure, just so we have some visual interest. So maybe I'll add a circle too. All right. So now you might be expecting me to save this in a format like PDF, and you're correct on that front, but When you save a PDF in Inkscape, so I just pressed Control-Shift-S on my system to open the Save As dialog. When you create a PDF in Inkscape, you get this extra second dialog here that most people just skip through and choose maybe convert text to paths, for example. And that's totally valid, but in this case, what we actually want to do is this omit text in PDF and create LaTeX file option. So this is the real magic that lets you make cohesive documents and have your figures match the rest of the document. So if I click OK here and then go look inside this directory, you'll notice that not only do I have drawing.pdf, which is the PDF file I saved, it has also saved drawing.pdf_tech. And so this is our magic file that is the bridge between LaTeX and our PDF file. So inside of my document here, I could now do, maybe we'll create a figure, so begin figure and end figure. And rather than something like include graphics, which you would use to load a PDF file, for example, I'm going to do input, \input. And so this is going to allow me to include another LaTeX file inside of my LaTeX file. And the file that I want to include is drawing.pdf_tech. So I'll just copy the name here. All right. And so if I go ahead and render this document, oops. So inside of this drawing.pdf_tech, it is trying to use this include graphics command, which you can see in this error here, undefined control sequence, include graphics. So I do need to include the package graphic_x, but I'm not using that include graphics myself. It is within this file that Inkscape has created. All right, and now if I preview this, you can see that indeed I have my figure here. And I'm going to add some centering and just adjust the positioning of this figure just so we don't deal with anything like unexpected indentation. So now it appears where it does in the LaTeX file itself. So the PDF and the LaTeX file match the positions. All right, but this actually isn't all that interesting. I could have done this with just a regular PDF where I saved it with the fonts embedded or where I converted the fonts to paths. So the real magic of that dialog box that I showed earlier with omit text in PDF and create LaTeX file is the omit text in PDF part. So if we had any text in here, let me just add, this is some sample text. If we had any text in this document and then we saved it as a PDF with that PDF tech document as well, then what would happen is it would show up in the PDF when I render it with LaTeX, but it would not be in the drawing.pdf file. In fact, I got an error right here, which is just related to the fact that I'm using color in Inkscape, and I need to therefore use package color. And you may get a similar warning about transparency if you have any transparent elements in your image. But in my case, it's just color for now. And what you'll see is the text, this is some sample text, appears in this image now, but the font and the color match just the font matches the rest of the document. So rather than this sans serif text here, which is like the default font face, when I actually look at this PDF file that is rendered as output, you will see that the text matches the font family of the LaTeX file, Libertine, and indeed it is actually selectable text in the final resulting PDF document. So this is some sample text is now a part of the LaTeX document itself. So that what I mentioned earlier about the text being omitted from the actual graphical elements in this PDF file, you can see just by opening drawing.pdf, and you will see that there is no text here. But if I were to open drawing.pdf_tech, the text would actually appear within this file. So it is actually LaTeX. Now, this is particularly useful if you have things like references to figure numbers or table numbers, or if you have, for example, a chemical formula or some math that you want to include in your figure. So let's say we just add some text like y equals x squared. And I'm doing this with $signs around it to indicate that this is math, just as I would in the LaTeX document. And just to mix it up, let's also change the color here. All right, so I've gone ahead and saved this, and I will re-render this document. And you can see that rather than $sign y equals x squared $sign, I actually get the mathematical rendered representation of that in LaTeX. So that's particularly useful for, say, equations that you want to have that match the remainder of your document. Or if you have a reference or a citation that you don't want to have to update every time you make a new version of your image, it will update automatically in the PDF text format. All right, now you will notice that the font and the size here are identical to the rest of the document, the font family. And that will be the case even if I make this text much bigger in the Inkscape document. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and re-render and preview again. And you'll notice that the text has shifted, but it is still just this 10-point libertine font from the document. So if you want to change the font size in your figure with this method, the way to do so is not to do it in Inkscape, it is to add the corresponding LaTeX commands. So for example, if I add \large to make this text large, and then save again, then when I render and preview, the font should be a little bigger now. So let me actually open this up in the bigger format here. Maybe I should go with huge or something much bigger so the difference is obvious. So I'll try this and re-render and preview. So there we go. Now you can clearly see that the font size is indeed much bigger now. So the way to control the font family and the font size is to use the corresponding LaTeX commands rather than the font size or family in Inkscape. Okay, so now we've seen how we can adjust the font size and the font family just by using the regular commands we would use in LaTeX. Let's talk a little bit about positioning now. So the text anchor and baseline will be the same in your LaTeX document as in your Inkscape file. So this is left aligned text in Inkscape. And so when it is rendered in the PDF format, the left part of the text is in the same location. And so you'll see that this went off the page in my Inkscape document, but in my preview here, it is not off the page. So the font size is actually different. However, it is appearing at the same location in terms of the text baseline and the left side of the text here. Now, if I wanted to center this, I could use the Align Center option in Inkscape. And if I go ahead and save this and render and preview, you will see that this text has now shifted. So again, the font and the size are controlled by LaTeX, but the positioning is inherited from what we see in Inkscape. So it's actually using the center point of the text to position it, and that center appears somewhere within this circle. And indeed, that is what we see in the LaTeX document, the PDF that we've rendered with LaTeX. So that is how you control positioning of text. And another thing to note here is that our text has actually gone a little off the page here. I would recommend, if you're working with text that is near the edge of a figure, to use either the left alignment for text near the left side or right alignment for text near the right side, so you don't spill over the size of the figure, so it doesn't go beyond the intended figure boundaries. And another thing I would recommend is using the same font family and font size if possible in Inkscape, just so you have a little bit better idea of what it's going to look like in the final result. So I'm using a different font family, but I am using 10-point font to match my 10-point font document. And that way I know that this y equals x squared is going to appear in roughly the same place. It's a different font family, so it won't be exactly the same, but it's not going to be far off in the final rendered version of this figure. So that is how you can use Inkscape with your LaTeX documents to create some compelling figures and figures that match the tone and the structure of the remainder of your document. Figures, in other words, that don't look like you just copied them from your Microsoft Excel plots straight into LaTeX. So it's a lot of work to create figures like this, but in my opinion, it's worth it, particularly for important documents.